Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Lorandom Artist discussion. It is our first of the post timeline era. The reason we're gathering today is in anticipation of the opening of Electric Op at Buffalo AKG. I'm your host, Peter Bauman, or Monk Antony, the editor-in-chief at Lorandom. And joining me today are four artists who are exhibiting at the show, and they are also just four of the most prominent voices in digital expression over the last 25 years. And they are Cory Archangel, Joan Heemskerk, Tully Hinkes, and Raphael Lozano-Hemmer. And also joining us today from the Lorandom team is Conrad House, or Nemo Cake, always the co-host for our artist discussions, and he is the collection lead at Lorandom. So everything that we collect goes through his watchful eye. Our four guests today basically don't need any introduction at all, but I will go ahead and introduce them. And the first one is Cory Archangel. He's an artist, composer, and curator known for his unique exploration of digital technology and its cultural impact. Archangel explores the potential and failures of old and new digital technologies, highlighting their obsolescence, humor, aesthetic attributes, and at times their eerie influence in contemporary life. From hacked video games to machine learning and social media, his projects challenge and parody technology and art, revealing the multifaceted ways that it impacts our life. And his work has been shown, everywhere. He's shown at biennials around the world, including the Whitneys and the Sharjah Biennial. He is the youngest artist since Bruce Nauman to hold a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York in 2011. His work has also just been shown at solo and group exhibitions around the world, at the biggest modern art museums in the world, like the MoMA, Tate, Pompidou, and PS1. And his work can just be found in the collections of the biggest museums in the world, including MoMA, SF MoMA, the Tate Modern, Buffalo AKG, Hammer Museum, Whitney, and many, many more. Our next guest is Joan Heemskerk, who is the net art legend. She is a contemporary artist whose practice examines the internet and its potential, including cryptography and quantum non-binary computing, which we got to talk about for a piece at Lorandom. Her diverse body of work includes photography, video, software, games, websites, and installations. Heemskerk was part of the legendary net artist duo Jody, who pioneered net.art in the mid-90s, exploring how the internet's underlying systems shape the relationship between technology and its users. So Jody's work has been exhibited at MoMA, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, ZKM in Karlsruhe, the ICC in Tokyo, Guggenheim in New York, Pompidou, iBeam, Rhizome, and many others. And she recently undertook a 2-month residency at CERN, the birthplace of the World Wide Web, and Copenhagen Contemporary. And the resulting work will be part of a show at Copenhagen Contemporary in 2025. Our next guest is Tully Hinkes. She is a cultural organizer, artist, and educator. Hinkes moved to New York City in 2000 when she began working under the artist moniker Lovid with her partner, Kyle Lapidus. Lovid's practice focuses on aspects of contemporary society where technology seeps into human culture and perception. Hinkes has organized collaborative projects and cultural events. She has also been a visiting artist at various universities worldwide and a mentor at Columbia University, the School of Visual Arts, and Cal Arts. Lovid's work has been shown in solo and group exhibitions also all over the world, including at Postmasters Gallery in New York and ICA in London. Lovid has performed at venues such as MoMA, The Kitchen, PS1, and Momi. Their work is also in several collections, including the Whitney Museums and the Toma Foundation. And another person like the previous three guests who needs no introduction is Rafael Lozano Hemmer, a media artist working at the intersection of architecture and performance art. He uses technology to create platforms for public participation with media such as robotic lights, digital fountains, computerized surveillance, digital walls, and telematic networks. He was the first artist to represent Mexico at the Venice Biennale in 2007. He has shown at biennials all over the world, and collections holding his work include MoMA, the Guggenheim, and Tate, as well as many others. He has received BAFTAs, the Ars Electronica Golden Nika, and has lectured at the biggest, most prestigious universities in the world. He has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions across the world, like everybody here, and including a mid-career retrospective at SF MoMA and his first at PACE that were both in 2022. And his solo show, Rafael Lozano Hemmer, Caressing the Circle, recently opened at Bitforms in New York. So we have this incredible artist discussion with four of the leading voices in new media art over the last 20, 25 years. We're so lucky to have them, and let's get started. I know you're not strangers. Some of you know each other. So does anybody want to talk about who you know or how you know each other?
You want me to start? Should
Well,
I?
I know how long I've
Yeah,
known you.
we could talk about us first.
Well, I don't know if you know Joan or anyone else before that. I know how long ago it was because I met Corey when I was pregnant with my 22-year-old daughter. So that's how long it's been. 23 years, I guess, almost.
Yeah, agree. Confirmed. Verified. Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah. And I was give a shout out to Harvest Works. In New York, which is a non-for-profit for media art. And I was actually an intern. I just arrived in New York shortly before that, and Corey was working there.
Yeah, I had been working there from like 2000 to, I don't remember what year it was. Was it 01 or something,
It was
Tali?
2001, yeah.
Yeah, like, so I worked there for a couple of years till I think 04, and I had all these different positions. Probably worth explaining. It's a digital media education and post-production studio, audio studios, video editing, Max MSP courses, NATO courses, if you even remember that, and like spreading all out to all that kind of stuff. Very cool place. And it was how I got my bearings in New York, was working there and meeting people and seeing how things operated. And a lot of the older generation of Soho artists used Harvestworks as their production facility because video artists even then didn't have their own editing. It was still like you had to go to a studio to make a video, pretty much.
And sound specifically, they had a recording studio. I guess that's why a lot of the time where people come and say there was never a space for digital art or media art, I feel it's important to elevate the spaces that have been doing this for a very long time. And we bonded over Paper Rad and Nautical Almanac and just spending a lot of time looking at things and the internet.
Yeah, because, Jacob would have just sent me the first Paper Rad email like not long before, because they started in 2000 and I saw it first on a computer at Harvestworks.
Remember that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a computer at work, which would seem so funny to people today because we didn't. I think I did have a computer at home, maybe, but I can't remember actually. I was definitely like worked at work on the work computers.
Totally.
Yeah. After hours, I would go get a piece of pizza and come back. So that's how we know each other.
Yeah, I think it highlights how both of you have strong roots in New York, and especially Corey, you grew up in Buffalo where Electric Up is, and I just thought that was really interesting, especially because it appears like Buffalo had a really profound influence on your practice, that this kind of tight-knit group of experimental video artists like the Vasulkas and and things like Axle Grease that were based in Buffalo. They were quite unique to that particular city. Is the piece that you're exhibiting at Electric Up, does it in any way play with that heritage or pay homage to your roots in Buffalo?
Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely not consciously, but probably intuitively. I mean, the kind of short stories that I'm very much a Buffalo artist, like my understanding of what artists do and what art is was pretty much shaped by growing up there. So I thought all artists made experimental video. Like that's like what, when I went to college, that's what I thought, but I realized pretty soon thereafter it wasn't the case. So I was on a residency at Alfred College at IEA, and they had a bunch of the early analog video synth gear, and they had in specific a Sandine image processor. And my piece in the show is just a segment of an 8-hour improvisation I did on the gear at Alfred College on residency there. And so it's not like a direct link, but that stuff is very much the vibe that I grew up with or what artists did.
Kind of expanding on this line of what other works we might be seeing in this upcoming show, did Joan, did you want to speak about what piece you're bringing to the show, and maybe expand on the influence or the history of the piece a bit more?
We will show the actually a Quake modification where it's the sounds are still intact of the monsters, but the spaces you visit, they are like black and white, like you see in my background, and there is like a kind of moray pops up because the 3D engine basically can't calculate the distance, so we had like huge spaces, and at first you think like, wow, is that doable? It's horrible. No, it's nice. Maybe one thing I have to say, like that the piece is made in 1998, and the first version of all the Quake modifications, we basically started in Hungary, in Budapest. We had a residency there at C-Cube. And in Budapest, there's also the Vasarely Museum, which of course is very op art. And then later that year, we were invited for a workshop in Aix, and we saw the Vasarely Museum. It's not influenced by it, but it gave kind of a green light. Okay, you can come up with these visuals. So at the time I went to art school, I mean, basically all the op art was not done. It was like a question of bad taste if you liked op art. And I think also that you need to find like because yeah, you only see like a still image now. But in reality, it's screaming and shouting, and you can shoot at it. So that's the pop in the op art.
The aesthetics of op art and maybe how, yeah, that hopefully this talk will be about the tension between that and some of the more technophile side and what makes this such an interesting movement. But yeah, Raphael, would you like to tell us about what you're showing at Electric Up?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, I'm only showing a print, so need no internet, no electricity. So I'm on the easy street for the first time in a long time. They've chosen to show a work called Method Random. Method Random is basically an algorithmically derived print that is got very simple rules. The rules are: take one of the existing pseudo-random number generators that are in the history of random number generation and choose colors at random, and then gradually increase the number of pixels that you can perceive at the same time. So if the random number generator was successful, it would produce a grayscale at the end of this entire experience. But in fact, what you see is these repeating patterns very, very quickly. The human can actually see repetition. And I've been fascinated by the impossibility of computing randomness and about the impossibility for computers to truly improvise and come up with something that is not derived by an instruction set. Because the paradox of computers is that in order for them to generate something random, they will utilize a program. And if you utilize the same program with the same seed, you will get to the same result. And of course, random number generators are used in everything from cryptography to identity to elections. And the fact that ultimately the computers are unable to truly come with something out that is random, to me is a statement of a tiny glimmer of hope that humanity still has an edge on at least one aspect of development, which is, pattern recognition. And it looks very much like just a color grid that just you get farther and farther away. The name of the piece is associated with a linear congruential generator, which is basically like a RANDU. It's a really bad algorithm that was used in the 60s and 70s by IBM, which constantly failed at producing randomness. So what you see is this algorithm fail.
Incredible. And is this just going to be one output from Method Random that is shown? Or are you showing it as like a grid like you've done before, I think in like 2015?
They're only showing one. It's on loan from the Toma collection. I wish that they had done more, because I think that what's beautiful is to do comparative, right? Like we started with like quadratic equations, which was what they first started using for random number generator. And then you could see what it was like in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. If you fast forward to the 2010s, the algorithms used now for encryption and so on are quite robust. You see that they're almost perfect. But if you spend enough time or you have enough to drink, you will see repetition.
What year is the piece from?
This piece is from 2015, I believe. Or I don't know. I actually bad at that.
I think it's 2014, 2015 is when.
Fantastic. That's great.
Yeah, 2014.
And then Tali, did you want to expand on, I think, the piece, your display ideas and the actual material behind the piece?
Yeah, it's actually really great to hear everybody else talk about their work and how there's this great conversation, and especially what Rafael's talking about. So we're showing a piece that was recorded in 2005 called 486 Shorts, and it was recorded at also a residency at university called RPI, another place in upstate New York that has technology art residencies. And in 2005, we brought, I just confirmed this, Kyle's childhood computer, which was an Intel 486, opened it up and recorded basically a kind of a live recording of shorting directly the graphics card by just putting cables in and creating physical shorts of the circuitry. We were able to capture directly output from the computer at the residency onto tape, mini DV tape. And so it's this decaying of the circuitry. And so really feeding into the idea of error, we focus on the relationship with analog instruments or analog interactions and the performance gesture or a moment in time where the human and the machine go at it. And so those recordings were edited to a series of very, very short 486 clips called 486 Shorts and released as a DVD in 2006. And then over the years, we did some installations in various locations that are instruction-based, where we asked the curators to collect e-waste that they had around and present a video on a DVD player or a computer as a kind of interactive system on a pile of e-waste. So we're exhibiting that for the first time in at least a decade. And it's already been interesting to see kind of the conversations we've been having with Tina on are we going to be collecting e-waste from 2024 or circa 2005. So it's a mix of thinking of the sort of obsolescence of aesthetic, both in the computer that's dated from the 80s, the interaction with it 2000, and then kind of throughout how it's going to be displayed as a video sculpture in the gallery.
Interesting you brought up the conversation you had with the curator, Tina Rivers Ryan. I wonder if anybody can talk more about what the curatorial process is is like? Does she approach you, or do you have more of a conversation about what work you show? Or yeah, how does that actually work, the decision-making process of what gets shown in an exhibition like this?
In our case, we had a couple of studio visits probably, and there were maybe two pieces that Tina was considering. One was actually an older video recording recorded in a similar system to what Corey was describing, one of our earliest recordings of analog synthesizer. And so probably, you have to balance all the artists and make sure that there's kind of each piece stands on its own. So
Yeah, actually, Tina came in contact, and I have to thank Corey that he said, yeah, there are still some European people who make work which will fit the show. So it was like Corey reminded me that you made something which is very suitable in the show. So that's how it started. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, it seems like word of mouth usually plays some kind of role with the curatorial process. So Buffalo AKG calls Electric Op the first major exhibition that connects op art and electronic art. But there are books like Frank Popper's Art of the Electronic Age that are about, that's 30 years old or so, who have made this connection. So what do we have to gain by contextualizing new media art and its development through the genealogy of movements like op art?
Well, I think we have a lot to gain, very little to lose, to be honest. I think that whether it's a comparison to op art or conceptual art or performance art, media art needs to be in relation to all of those traditions of experimentation. And it is the job of the museum to actually demystify the new modes of production by, sharing continuities and ruptures with what was there before. So I, for one, do welcome these connections because it also helps, the artist stand in relation. And I don't think art is ever made without a context. Shows like this help us have discussions like we're having right now. As soon as Tina told me about the proposal, I went and studied op art, and all the op art that I knew was coming from Latin America. I'm a Mexican artist, and Carlos Cruz Diez or Jesus Rafael Soto, or so all of these are very, very well-known and well-respected artists in Latin America. We often talk about geometric abstraction, but I did not know the diversity that actually came through from op art. Like, we think of it as very specific, something that I think that Joan was saying that it wasn't cool. There was something really uncool about, the repetition and the mathematical and the way that even media started using op art. I was just reading that Bridget Riley, when she did one of her very first museum shows, at the time her work was copied and used massively in media, and there was no protections for her as an author to claim a certain degree of ownership over this. And actually that destroyed her idea of like what a museum should do, and that's not popularize things for advertising. So I think that fast forward to today, op art is just a category that is actually quite broad. I'm learning a lot about it. I know what I don't like. I don't like the orderly presentations. I think that everybody in this call is not into the orderly. Maybe Corey, sometimes you've been into the orderly, but I'm troubled by the orderly in general. But having said that, I really defend this idea of the trompe-l'oeil. I think that the image perception, trickery, faking, that's us. And the fact that they were criticized for only being effectist is a complete misunderstanding of the history of art. Artists have always been using these effects. And I do think that media artists are following that, tradition of effectism for a purpose. So I'm very excited to be in this show.
I agree with Rafael, and I think we kind of recently, everybody loves to celebrate a digital art or media art exhibition. And I always see those with a lot of caution because we're so often kind of put in that lumped into exhibitions based on the process and the tools that we use rather than a theme or a more broader exhibition around, like any other art form is kind of put together. And so this is a real special opportunity, I think, to have this show and really contextualize it within art history. So I'm happy that this is happening, and hopefully that continues to evolve. And that is the work of a great curator, right? Pulling things together and seeing things that maybe individually we don't see as artists, but as artists, and I know for maybe all of you in the group, we're all work in music as well as in visual art, and have been like greatly influenced by other art forms, no matter, or other practices and ideas. And so those are the things that I think are really, for artists, are the interesting things. Those are the shows we want to see our work in, these other connections.
One thing that Raphael and Telly are talking about is how op art challenges the role of illusion in art, and it plays with the audience's vision. It does that in a few ways by simulating motion and also dimensionality, like you can see just behind me. It was challenging those things on a flat canvas. And I'm wondering, what do you think this 2024 reexamination of op art is challenging? Could it be challenging the flat surface of the screen, or what do you see this reexamination highlighting or challenging today?
Yeah, I think you're right that most of the op art I know here in Europe, it was like, or either paintings or things like tiles in a public space. And the thing was, a lot of this op art was generated with computers, and they only had the output. I think when you now for the show you have electrical op, the big difference is that you really are on the screen and you really experience the pieces with sound alive. Probably not all, like Raphael's work is a print, but in general, I think when you look at the work in the medium it's made, so in the computer, it's completely different than you have the printout or a representation of the calculation in a painting or a sculpture. Or there's this famous computer artist in the Netherlands who he made like color tiles all over. You cannot go to one city and there's like this color patterns with tiles, but you never had a one-to-one experience. I think it's a huge step from the mainframe of these old computers where they had the output, and nowadays we can do it live, and it will be live in the show.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic that you bring up. Op art has kind of always represented this kind of intermingling between science and mathematics in art, and you kind of talk about how like these early op arts were made with computers, but only on a mainframe computer where only the output was the kind of finalized art product. And maybe I think we can kind of expand on like, how do we see op art as maybe anticipating software-based art practices that we see come shortly after?
Only now it's connected to a previous movement of op art. I mean, you could do shows about digital art connected to pop art, or to conceptual art, or to performance art, or maybe even to Dada. Or so there's all this old art movements you can connect to media art, because media art is everything.
I'm actually have been studying another art movement that has a relationship to op art, which is the patterns and repetition movement, kind of P&D of the 70s, which was primarily painting based, but a lot of textile, and was related to the kind of like feminist wave of the era. And I'm reading this great catalog, and in that they use the term, they talk about patterns and as being promiscuous, the promiscuity of patterns, in a sense that they want to expand outside of the frame. They want to kind of, as in a painting, the pattern can be on a painting, but it can be on a chair, and it can kind of enter the domestic space. That was sort of the goal of the P&D movement. And I do see, not so much in terms of the flatness of the screen, but the limitation of a computer screen or a projection. People who use traditional media, meaning like anything where you can assign, whether it's a print, you can decide the size and the dimension and the shape of the work you're putting out in the world. And so there's a kind of a liberty to it, but still working within defined borders. And so I do think that when I look at some of the op art, there is this tendency to break out of the boundaries of the borders and create a sort of illusion of space and draw the audience in. And I do think that to some extent, in digital media artists working with the constraint of a screen within a computer or a TV, there is often this either solution, like so clearly in Joan's piece right there, where you're creating a sense of infinity, something that could kind of continuously come out of the screen, or you're always are like referencing or dealing with the border, which is, the kind of traditional photographic, it's a photographic frame or a painterly frame. So in that sense, I am looking forward to seeing how those two issues are resolved in the exhibition or discussed.
I just want to add that Joan had a great idea to do a Dada. Could have a Dada data. I mean, has anyone done that show? Dada. To be continued. One thing is, I like the idea that media art is everything. And I think like probably what actually brings us together and why you wanted to start with how we knew each other, like we all are, our art in many ways couldn't be so different, but we all have been aware of each other for 25 years. And that's really, for me, the relationship here. Like we're tied together in a way, even though we are all as different as could be. And that's the kind of tricky thing with media art. It's everything. So Joan, that's really, I had never heard it said that way.
Let's do that. Let's do that show.
I want to just comment on what Tali was just saying about the fields and the repetition and the patterns, because I do think that that's a really fascinating connection between a lot of what we're dealing with, especially with dealing with participation and perception that is in the round. I mean, I'll remember, the first time I saw a projector, what an incredible thing it was. It was an Electrohome 3CRT projector. And then all of a sudden, what was always behind some glass was taking over the body space. I remember seeing your work, Corey, for example, projected and thinking, oh my God, I'm inside of this video game, and this is really significant. And I think that that's very connected to what Tali was saying, because there is this idea of the field taking over, and we call it a treatment. Sometimes the artwork is not an object, it's a treatment. It's something that then can be repeated. So similar to what Joan was saying about this artist who's repeating all of these patterns of mosaics throughout Holland, there is something vectorial about the mathematics of op art, right? Because it means that you could do this effect very small, or you can grow it. You can scale it in different ways. And I think that that's very similar to media art, because the moment that you can project, the moment that you can see it intimate or intimidating, this is something that you can determine on a per case basis. And I don't think that other mediums of painting did that as much. Even when you're dealing with abstract expressionism and there's this field, I don't think that the rules were so clearly determined, So what I think that the op art thing is today is to, go back to thinking about the issues of perception. So it's not so much the math, it's about, well, how do we perceive image making? And is that in a very constrained environment, or is that also contaminate the rest of your world? What was it? Promiscuity, the promiscuity of patterns. That's great. I'll pretend I knew that. It's a great term.
Yeah, it's actually that the piece we're showing that's like control space, and it's basically that the computer can't cope with the big space. So to go out of the box of a small 3D world and you enlarge it, you get these distortions, which normally you deal with it. And I think a lot of pieces of the past digital, you deal with the kind of, limitations of the computer, but then you go to the max of what a computer can do. But the whole different thing is, I think when I talked about this tiles everywhere, that's, I mean, if it's, for example, in a tunnel, if you cross the railroad, but the difference with the computer is, and with works made, and especially on the internet, that it's like a medium. It's your broadcast. It's a one-to-one thing. You experience it at your home, and it's your computer. And I think that's completely different with other art forms, except maybe radio broadcasts, television shows. But there are not so many artists who have access to the medium. And I think that's a big difference, because if your output is like a canvas or a public space, you're never on this one-to-one scale. Never on a one-to-one scale, then you're listening to a radio program or watching a TV show or experience a digital art piece on your personal computer.
I think it's a really good point, how the limitations of the screen, but then how they can be so personal and personalized as well. I was curious about the responsive eye. So this was at MoMA in 1965, this big op art exhibition, when it was really becoming popular with Vasarely and Riley in the mid 60s there. And it had a lot in common with some of the other movements in the 60s. I thought it was interesting that the curator of Responsive Eye, he said in the catalog, none of the artists follow systems or rules. Rather, they discover inherent laws through the creative process, implying that this is not a systems-based art. But then a year later, Lawrence Alloway had this systemic painting exhibition at the Guggenheim that had basically a lot of the same artists as Responsive Eye. It had Poons and Kelly and Martin and Stella, and that was all based on systems work. So I'm wondering, how do you think of op art? Do you think of it as systems-based work or as sites in the Responsive Eye?
I guess it was kind of visible in the 60s, 70s, and it had to do with the time. It was the liberating 60s and 70s, so you could come up with these colors and these patterns and go a bit like funky in a way, like it's like funky abstractionism, and okay, it has to deal with perspective, etc., different things. But I know when visiting the museums of Vasarely, it was really, the one in Hungary was like in a total collapse. The one in X, it was like plants were growing into it. It's, nobody cared. In 2000, it was like maybe they restored it now, but basically it didn't have any value 20 years later, and it got picked up. I think maybe they got rid of the plants and or it's overgrown. I don't know, but it was kind of shocking to see all these paintings in a kind of decay. And in X, there were literally plants growing in the museum, and in Hungary, it was just a break open of the border, and they had the habit of showing plants in the museum to make it more lively for the people who had to sit there. So they had a lot of nature mixing in with this op art, which was kind of, I think a way of saying like, okay, this is it, and we don't care, we just want to live our own life.
That's such a great anecdote. And I don't so much think that this is a question or an issue of artist practice. I think this is an issue and question of institutions. And why do things get labeled or curated a certain way at a certain time? And, there are multiple stakeholders for each of those decisions. Like, a museum with a massive collection that needs to be raise their value. And so words like systems, like generative, like new media become trendy and then untrendy at different points in art history. And artists just do their thing and ride the wave when it's there.
May I say that I think that it's also like a false dichotomy in the sense that, if Said's position is that, they were not systems, there's anybody who pretends they're outside of a system has a problem, because everything's a system, language is a system, paint is a system, so we can't be outside of systems. The idea, though, that there is a certain kind of emergent set of rules, which is, I think, what he was trying to say, that they weren't starting with the rules, that the rules were emerging. I think that this is a valid point, because I do think, even in my own practice, sometimes I start with the algorithm, exactly like the piece that I'm showing at Electric Op. I start with the algorithm and then develop the piece. But there's other times when the piece itself, creates something that forms something that is new and that emerges. And I think that these are the two possibilities that we see in the studio a lot, is top down and bottom up, and we embrace both.
It's like a third situation that I would have a lot of time is just being in a totally black room and just not like feeling around the walls and being totally lost. That's like or maybe that's like a part of those two systems, just like being like, I don't know if this is good or bad at all. Like, I have no idea what's going on.
That's like 90% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and then I would maybe we could segue back into the question or a lot of times people don't know what's going on at all with artists, and people just do their best to, well, maybe this is that, or maybe this is what's happening. So, and I haven't been doing this that long, but entire things have come and gone, and they were just like totally wrong. Or maybe almost right, and even the right ones have vanished, and the wrong. So it's been very surprising to me to see how up for grabs everything is, and everything is always being reevaluated, which is kind of amazing, but also terrifying, So I thought there was like adults in the room when I was younger, but it turns out it's like a plane with no pilots. Two different metaphors. Sorry.
I was reading something today, Corey, an article you were in the New York Times, and it was about the death of net art in 2004, so 20 years ago. And it was about how the internet had such a bad reputation now, and net art was over, and it was because of the poor reputation of the internet. Already 20 years ago, that there was this, because of the dot-com crash, that there was this negativity around the internet at that time, and that reflected upon the art made on it negatively. And it reminded me of today, and it's maybe one of those constant challenges of the digital, is that we have to combat the sociology of it and how society just responds to these mediums in bizarre ways sometimes. One maybe last string of questions, or one wrap-up area. I don't know if you know this art historian, Domenico Quaranta. He described op art, and I thought this was really interesting. He described it as radically technophile, for reasons that we've talked about before. And he argued that it was sort of the beginning of the digitization, or the beginning of technology and art in a lot of ways in the mid 60s. And that from that point on, in maybe the late 60s, that new media art was really forced to become its own autonomous art world, is how he describes it in his book, Beyond New Media Art. And I'm wondering, was that your experience, like Tali mentioned, it just from an artistic practice point of view? What was it your experience that new media art has become this entirely shunned autonomous world? And If so, how has that maybe been changing over the last decade or two?
You said something about quoting Corey and the .com, and I want to make a point that all of us are think about same generation, and we blossomed and bloomed and made our career during that time as a response to the hypercommercialization of the internet. And it was at the moment, and this is something I don't know how everybody's thinking about now, but whether it was intention or not, there was like a political nature to that, and there was a lot of intent into working with those systems that were not financialized or necessarily popular outside of our bubble, which it was very popular at. And another thing I'm going to respond to it, we in the beginning of a conversation we mentioned HarvestWorks and other institutions, and so speaking specifically about New York State, since I think about the 70s, has had an endowment from Rockefeller, I think, to the state funding specifically to ensure that there's always grants available for media institutions, which is actually why places like Buffalo and Alfred and all the new places in New York City, that Rhizome, et cetera, have been here for so many decades. And so often that history in the kind of new wave of awakening to digital art is being forgotten. But in New York State specifically, this has been a thriving, rich community of artists, curators, institutions for 50 plus years. So we call it, intent. And if you want to have a kind of marginalization and kind of feeling, is like, sure, it has not been commercially as accepted, and not in a sense that as artists who work in galleries, but it's not like not every gallery in New York is exhibiting and selling a media-based artist, but it has been here for a very long time. And, so and knowing specifically that talking about New York State, now there's definitely a different awareness, understanding, and welcoming, and renewed interest, I would say, which is really interesting. It's great, but we kind of just have to remember that not only have we been through like the highs and lows, but there is a continuation of a lot of infrastructure and a lot of history.
Yeah, I want to add something that indeed, it's like Net Artist retired, I think, you say 2004, I think even in 2000 it was retired already. The Net Art Group decided to be retired. And I hope I'm still not retired. Yet I kind of excluded me from that decision to retire. It will continue also because, Tal was talking about New York City, but net artists, for example, they're all over the world. And even today, it's quite easy to transport a digital work. So our work is like asked all over the planet. And it's definitely not limited to the States. And it's not even started, I think, in the States. I mean, there were a lot of movements in Europe and Eastern Europe, and probably there also in South America. So it's a global movement, and I think that's so I didn't have to deal also with, okay, you had to be in New York to be a famous artist. Well, if I would have been a painter, probably I needed to go to Berlin or New York to get any attention. So I think the net art movement, it's really a global thing, and it's not limited to the classical art hubs in the world, let's say.
Yeah, I want to defend the idea that perseverance is really important because, things come and go as Tali was describing. To not be sucked up into the specific, flavor of the month is really important, to just be true to what you've been wanting to say and you keep saying it. I don't think that media art has been shunned. I do think that, like some things have changed for the better. Last time we call it normalization. Like when Corey was on the cover of Art Forum, that's a really good thing, right? Like that's okay. So this is where we wanted to be. Here we are. When Joan's work is at MoMA, that's a good thing. And then of course, Barbara London is no longer at MoMA. I mean, I'm in MoMA because of Barbara London. It's thanks to her that she had the vision to introduce this work. So we do depend still on a frail number of people who sometimes get into power. I mean, Tina now is famously is already the editor of Art Forum. And so I am seeing younger curators who are open to electronic art become into positions of power. And I do think that that's a healthier thing, because, a lot of the people who have been marginalized in media art will be able to get a different type of venue, while simultaneously paying respects to all the institutions like V2 in Holland, or ZKM, or ICC, or Transmediale, or there's just so many of them that have, basically supported all of us throughout all of this past 30 years. What one can say is that this is here to stay. We're working with media, which is the language of globalization. It's inevitable. This is not going to go anywhere, so people better get used to it.
I think it's kind of funny how in the beginning of the chat, when we were talking about kind of how the curatorial, I guess, options were chosen for which work was being selected for the show, was kind of word of mouth. And I think what Raphael kind of says is sometimes it's easier when we have people in positions of power that can help shine a light on some of these secluded moments or movements. It just hopes that the person in power is giving us the right word of mouth to spread the works that we want to see around. So I think it ties in quite nicely with what we started talking about.
And one more thing, because I just sounded too techno-optimistic. What I recognize that 95% of media art, including my own, is shitty. Because I also think that it's very important to acknowledge and self-deprecate, because, we're just trying to figure shit out. We don't know what's actually going to be great in 20 years or 30 years. But I mean, I do think that there is a justifiable shunning that needs to be done with 95% of what we do.
Yeah, I think the point on resilience is really important, and just that these technologies don't always have a good reputation, but that doesn't mean that they will never. And also that doesn't mean that art can't be used to challenge those technologies and look at them more carefully, like a lot of net art did with the internet. Joan's work did in the 90s. And Raphael, you mentioned at the very end, I mean, it doesn't always have to be optimistic with technology and art. We can look at some of these things through a more critical lens. And yeah, does anybody else have any closing thoughts before we wrap up today?
It's so nice to see everybody. I don't think we've never all been together. I think me, Tali, and Joan might have been together, but not all four of us. So I was like really thrilled about being invited to this. Are you still in Montreal?
Yeah,
Okay.
I am.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
You guys should come and visit, capital of good mezcal out of Mexico.
Yeah.
No, thank you. It's an honor to have you guys, and thank you to Peter for really putting together this group. Super happy to have this group here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
What a great chat. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
See you
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.